Everyone, I'm Bambi Francisco Roizen, and this is CRT, Culture, Religion, and Technology, with a look back at this week's news. One of my stories, a left-wing political pundit debates 20 MAGA supporters and implies that, well, they're all racist, religious zealots, or just stupid. And I'll talk about the United Nations passing the International Day of Hope. Also, we'll look at the movement to get the 10 Commandments displayed in schools, which is getting a lot of momentum. Finally, Delian Asporohouv, a partner at VC Fund Founders Fund and the co-founder and president of space company Varda, he'll join me later. Well, a video of one left-wing political pundit against 20 MAGA supporters went viral this week. This debate on DEI, religion, and other hot topics took place on Jubilee, which is a YouTube show that hosts debates, typically one person against a larger group that opposes that one person. For this particular debate, it was called 20 Trump supporters take on one progressive. And the person debating on the left was Sam Seder. He's a liberal pundit who frankly was not very impressive. I mean, largely because he was debating a number of 20 to 30-year-olds who really seemed nervous, but they did have some great points. He, on the other hand, was not so nervous, but made a lot of disingenuous debate tactics, if not incoherent claims. So I want to go through some of them because I think we all need to get better at having conversations with people who don't agree with us. So let's go through some of Sam's claims and interactions, and you'll see in these videos, you'll probably say, hey, I've actually been in conversations like that, or I've heard arguments like that. So it's good for us to actually take a look at them. So Sam's first claim was actually not very accurate, and I'll go over that, but let's watch his claim first.
Trump's attack on DEI hides his real goal, which is to give corporations more power.
Okay. Now, the first rule in debating is to define the words. In this case, there's lots of words in there: DEI, attacks, corporations, power. I mean, we have to be very specific, particularly if you're going to be debating somebody about a claim that you're making. So, because all these words can mean kind of different things, right? Power is not a bad word in and of itself, for instance. But I'm just going to focus on the word attacks. Like, what does attacks mean? I mean, it could be physical. Are they talking about Trump attacking a bunch of minorities with a plastic baseball bat? Are we talking rhetorical attacks? Now, I listened to this debate, so I believe when Sam says attacks, he actually means the rescission of DEI policies. So DEI policies are being attacked because they've been rescinded. But we should get clarity on that because there were two executive orders actually that rescinded DEI programs. So is he referring to the DEI programs ending in government or corporations? So the one ending in government is called Ending Radical and Wasteful Government DEI Programs and Preferences. The one for corporations is Ending Illegal Discrimination and Restoring Merit-Based Opportunity. Now, Sam may say he's referring to both of them, or he may say he's actually just referring to corporations. But let's look at that claim again, and this way we can get an idea. It says Trump's attack on DEI hides his real goal, which is to give corporations more power. So the DEI attacks, again, those are the rescission of DEI policies, are giving corporations more power. Okay, power, I'm assuming the power to abuse the system, I guess. So without getting that clarity from him on which executive order Sam is referring to, we can assume his claim is about corporations abusing their power because the DEI policies are gone. So one debater zeroes in on corporate power and basically says, well, the abuse that you claim is happening, the abuse is happening because the DEI policies existed, not because they're gone or not because they were rescinded. And this is because companies were discriminating against qualified candidates, partly to get tax breaks if they hire a minority. And this debater is referring to, I believe, the Work Opportunity Tax Credit, which gives you tax credits if you hire a minority within a targeted group, including ex-felons. But listen to what Sam says. he basically says, wait a second, he's not talking about corporations. He's talking about government agencies. What? Okay. We're talking about government agencies. I get it. So then the discussion shifts, okay, to the military, which, yeah, that's a government agency. It shifts to the military. And the debater starts talking about trans people and how they're not being discriminated against. Basically, they are not hired maybe because it's more for safety issues. And then Sam changes his claim again. Listen. What? The Defense Department is the largest government agency, accounting for like 13% of the budget and with 1.3 million people working there. So what? And in the rescissions of DEI across agencies, it includes the military explicitly. I think we have that. There it is. It's in writing. The Biden administration forced illegal and immoral discrimination programs across virtually all aspects of the federal government, ranging from airline safety to military. So the debater does say, yeah, the military is included in those orders, but maybe he could have been more forceful and said, well, Sam, have you actually read the executive orders? But then Sam just throws out this red herring, basically, to throw this guy off and basically try to divert the conversation, but it was very unsuccessful. Listen. Yeah, Sam, what are you talking about? First, you're talking about corporations. That was in your claim, corporations. Someone brings up corporations and you say, wait a second, I'm not talking about corporations. I'm talking about government agencies. So somebody brings up the military and you say the military is excluded from your claim. But then you bring up the Air Force and then you're mad about the Tuskegee Airmen, who, by the way, are Black military pilots. So they're part of the military, which you don't want to talk about, which apparently is not part of your claim. Anyway, so I don't know if you noticed that Sam also refers to DEI as DEIA. I guess that's kind of what we're referring to DEI as DEIA. A for accessibility, because they want to show that, hey, look, we're for the disabled. But I really don't like this idea of having to, continue to add on new letters. I mean, I think, obese people, we want to support them. Of course, maybe they're not in the minority. So 60% of people in the country are obese. Anyway, are we going to say DEIAO? So I don't want to fall for that. So I'm not going to add that. I'm going to just refer to DEI. So DEI, the discussion eventually moves into the definition of DEI. So many people have different definitions. I have one. Here's mine. DEI policies enforce critical race theory, right? CRT. So what is CRT? And not this show, but CRT, the academic sort of philosophy. Well, it is an ideology that looks at the world through an oppressor-oppressed lens to actively flip that hierarchy around through ideological indoctrination and racial and minority quotas. That's my definition. Now, Sam doesn't believe DEI has anything to do with quotas. So watch. Okay, so this is where one of the debaters should have called him on this and said, okay, if your claim is that now people are being discriminated in hiring practices based on race, well, where is that happening? I mean, you heard Sam say, like, give me the evidence. Well, somebody should have said, well, where is that happening, Sam? Where's the evidence? Because all we see now are a lot of white people losing their government jobs. Or maybe Sam is saying Black and brown people are the only ones getting fired. So where's the evidence of discrimination? Yeah, didn't really provide those. Well, speaking of evidence, and this is really good where maybe the debaters probably should have had the receipts here and should have been prepared to give evidence of DEI as essentially quota driven, because It is happening. It's happening across corporations and in government. So I do have some examples for you. In 2022, the NASDAQ required companies to list at least one female board of director and at least one that self-identified as an underrepresented minority. And then here we have United Airlines in 2021. United Airlines said it planned on having half of its pilots in the next decade to be women or people of color. And then according to a Forbes article, many companies that had DEI quotas are rolling them back. Paramount said it would stop aspirational hiring goals. That's according to Forbes. Then you had Bank of America said it is scrapping diversity targets. Pepsi will no longer use representative hiring goals. Goldman Sachs had a policy that any company it took public must have 2 minority board members, and they're scrapping that. Accenture says it will no longer have diversity targets. And then as for government, the University of Central Florida, which does receive funds from the Department of Education, explicitly advocates quotas in hiring practice. And that I got that from Christopher Rufo of the Manhattan Institute. And then if we want to see outright discrimination based on race, just watch the Democrats and their explicit call to fill the DNC with diversity quotas. Let's roll.
Specify that when we have a gender non-binary candidate or officer, the non-binary individual is counted as neither male nor female, and the remaining 6 offices must be gender balanced. With the results of the previous 4 elections, our elected officers are currently 2 male and 2 female. In order to be gender balanced, we must elect 1 male, 1 female, and 1 person of any gender.
Oh my gosh. God, those are quotas. Yep. And they've led to a lot of discrimination against many qualified white people. Okay, so let's get to claim 2, which in the debate. Let's watch that debate, claim 2 from Sam. Let's roll that.
Is, unless you're a billionaire, a religious fundamentalist, or a xenophobic nationalist, voting for Trump was a mistake.
Okay, so basically now we're getting into economics and religion. There it is. There's the claim. You can see his claim. Unless you're a billionaire, religious fundamentalist, or xenophobic nationalist, voting for Trump was a mistake. So said another way, if you're working class, and that's about 99% of those who voted for Trump, and you're not a religious fundamentalist or xenophobic nationalist, you made a mistake. So basically what he's saying, it's pretty simple. What he's saying is that if you're not xenophobic and you're not religious, so if you're not racist and if you're not religious, then and you're not a billionaire, okay, then what are you? Then you basically voted against your economic self-interest. Because after all, according to Sam, only billionaires benefit under Trump. So, and if you don't believe Sam, that you made a mistake, that you didn't vote based on your economic self-interest, the best interest of your own economics, well, then you're basically an idiot or dumb. Well, wow, Sam, that is insulting. I mean, that's basically what you're saying, is that the those who voted for Trump are either stupid, religious, or racist. Now, I wonder how of the 75 million or so people would you divide that up, like 30, 30, 30? Wow, that's really insulting. So let's unpack this. Let's look at half of the white males under 30 who did vote for Trump. 99% of them, I'm sure, are not billionaires, and a majority are not racist or religious, let alone religious zealots. So Sam is saying, therefore, you're dumb on economics. That's because Democrats are for the working poor and the middle class. They provide far more services to the poor. They are advocates for minimum wage for the average person. Democrats are the ones that are providing all the safety nets. And they're the ones that are subsidizing your college costs. In fact, I mean, heck, they're paying for your college. So middle class, particularly the poor, they should love Democrats. I mean, this is pretty much the standard take. Even Dave Chappelle had this take. Watch. Yeah. Well, Chappelle got it wrong too. And Sam definitely has it wrong. You see, when my family came to America, we were poor immigrants, and we and many other poor immigrants didn't come to America for handouts. And I'm pretty sure that the immigrants coming into America now, maybe many of them are coming for handouts, particularly the ones that Biden let in. But I'm just talking about the typical immigrants who come here legally. I'm sure they didn't come here for handouts. They didn't come for the minimum wage. They came for the economic ladder to climb so they could be successful. We came, and immigrants come here for upward socioeconomic mobility. Voting for Trump gives everyone a better shot at becoming a billionaire. Voting for Democrats, with its mass regulations, well, they take that mobility away and preserve the hierarchy. It keeps the people at the top, basically, and the people on the bottom, left on the bottom. But the beauty of more capitalism and less socialism is that the status quo, those at the top, constantly changes. Let's look at the millionaire stats. It's really interesting stats here. Only 21% of millionaires inherited their wealth. So that means 80% are working up this ladder of success. Let's see. There are 1,700 new millionaires every day. Half of millionaires are self-employed, not working for the government. In 1900, there were only 5,000 millionaires. Now there's 22 million. That's really good, right? This is capitalism at work. Let's look at the one about billionaires. And that, oh, by the way, the source on that is Timothy Sykes. I guess he's a self-made millionaire trader. But so if you don't want to believe Timothy, at least look at Forbes. So here, this is from Forbes, 67% of the Forbes 400 list are self-made. I think that was in 2023. In 2024, oh, that's 2023. 2024, 67% of the Forbes 400 lists are self-made, and 70% of the Forbes 400 lists are self-made. That was in 2023. And I believe the 400, I think that changes quite a bit. I mean, hasn't been static. There's opportunities for people to become billionaires, and we've seen it. That 400 list has changed tremendously. And people have made their billions, and it's changed tremendously because people have made their billions in different industries. Predominantly more technology, like, computer bits type of billionaires now in the 21st century versus sort of the latter half of the 20th century. So a lot of those have to do with more deregulation and tax cuts. So yes, you don't have to be a billionaire to benefit from Trump's economic policies. And then what about those people who didn't vote for the economy, but they're essentially middle class, they're hippies who live in communes, say, and they love everyone, but they just can't stand authoritarian mandates. They're not billionaires, they're not racist, they're not religious, but they're benefiting, and they don't think it's a mistake. So Sam's claim is clearly false. But let's continue with this claim, and now the discussion moves into religious fundamentalism, because Sam's claim is that all religious fundamentalists benefit from Trump's win. So let's figure out what Sam thinks is a religious fundamentalist.
Talking about religious doctrine supplanting democracy and civil society.
Yeah, so you get it there. So Sam he says he doesn't like religious fundamentalists and theocrats because they want to impose their morality that comes from their religion. He doesn't want religious doctrine supplanting civil society. So then one debater comes in, I believe he says he's actually trans. He almost gets to what would have been good to hear, and he sort of says it, but basically what he's trying to say is trans ideology is a moral position based on religion, and it is being imposed on us. I mean, after all, what is religion? Among other things, it is your relation to that which is regarded as sacred and holy. And trans people believe that sex is fluid, and that is sacred. That is truth. That is holy. Yeah. So what this young man is getting at is that transgender ideology is morally wrong. And so in essence, Biden and the Democrats imposed their morality based on their religion. If you don't believe that, they pushed this. Recall Biden's Assistant Secretary of Health, Rachel Levine. She claimed gender affirming care for minors is safe and medically necessary. And according to the New York Times, this person, Rachel Levine, wanted to lower the age limit for hormone therapy and these so-called surgeries. So the debater says, are you okay with this? Are you okay with this for young kids? Now, Sam sort of shrugs this off. Well, actually gets kind of upset about it and says it rarely happens. So we're making a big deal out of nothing. And it's basically a healthcare issue. He basically says kids need this, and if they're struggling, they should consult with their doctors and parents, and it should be fine. So basically, Sam is saying this isn't a religious issue, right? This is no one's imposing any morality regarding this issue, because it's really a healthcare issue. In fact, it's a biology issue. So actually, that's a good thing, right? That's great, because it makes the conversation even simpler. Biology, some people are born female, some male, and a very small percentage jumbled up. But that does not mean that sex is on the spectrum. So if Sam wants to ignore biology, then he's actually getting into the religious realm. He's basically a Gnostic. I bet he doesn't even know it. But Gnosticism is a heretical religion that believes bodies are mere vessels of two spirits, male and female. And that is a religion, a heretical one, but it's a religion. So in fact, Sam, I believe you do prefer a government that imposes religious views. You just want them to impose yours. All right, well, this landed in my inbox today. The United Nations passes the International Day of Hope. Sounds uplifting and innocuous. Why not? Let's have a day of hope. So the UN has a page. So I was so interested in this. I wanted to know, like, oh, what are they going to tell me? How should I be hopeful? So I went on their page about hope. And, it starts off pretty well. It says how hope drives global change. And it says starts with belief in success. I agree. Problem solving mindset. I agree as well on that. But then it got into no poverty. And then zero hunger. That kind of lost me, because in reality, we can never get to a world that wipes out all poverty or hunger. I mean, in the Bible, in Mark 14:7, it does say the poor you will always have with you. Other initiatives on here, clean water. I'm for clean water. What else? Innovation, I like that too. But then it gets down to reduce inequalities, or reduce inequities, reduced inequalities. That's what it says. And it says hopelessness is often a consequence of oppression and discrimination. So it continues the cycle of oppression as all the related negative outcomes of hopelessness. So that's basically CRT light, right? I mean, that's basically saying, look at the world through an oppressor and oppressed lens. And to me, that's just not being hopeful, right? That's just being constantly aggrieved. Now, some of you are going to say that, wait a second, the Bible says that you need to be, good to the poor, and you need to be charitable to the needy. And it does say that, sure. But it doesn't say that's how you achieve hope. And this is what the UN is saying. This is how you achieve hope, because you have to do these activities and then you'll actually be more hopeful. But in the Bible, actually, it's only one thing gives you hope, and that's God. Where is it? What Bible verse do I have here? In Romans 15:13, may the God of hope fill you with all joy and peace as you trust him, so that you may overflow with hope by the power of the Holy Spirit. And in Psalms 31:24, it says, be strong and take heart, all you who hope in the Lord. So basically, where do you get hope? You focus on God. Okay, final story. A Texas Senate panel passed a bill requiring the 10 Commandments to be displayed in all public K through 12 classrooms. This has been considered, sadly, unconstitutional for a long time. But I just want to make one point on this. You know, many schools recognize Pride Month or hang pride flags. So let's just be clear that Pride Month, pride flags, those have become religious symbols. Because again, religion is a pursuit of interests that one ascribes a supreme importance. And LGBTQ, you know, the praising and the honoring of those people through Pride Month, Pride Day, Pride Year, you know, that's religious. So you can hang a pride flag and that is protected under free speech, but we can't put up the 10 Commandments and that's not protected. So here are my final thoughts about that. Again, I think you've heard me say many times that we are living in a religious war. There are those that believe in a transcendent God who would like to put up the 10 Commandments, and those who believe they are gods. Both sides are making a claim of what is the nature of man. And for years, we've ignored these religious debates as we tried to be rational and enlightened, kind of, you know, just push those under the rug and not be bothered by those conversations. The German legal scholar Carl Schmitt says we won't be able to escape that question. At some point, society will have to take sides, and those sides will be evident in politics. Now let's get to that interview. Great to see you.
Great to see you. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, you're in LA. I see the background there. You're some sort of hangar. That's so cool. Hey, how were the LA fires? Were you okay?
Yeah, sort of pretty big city, and it was a sort of small chunk of the city. Obviously, sort of terrible tragedy, but just like as a proxy, Varda's got about 120 employees. We only had one that was sort of affected by the fires, and so part of it is we're a little bit further south, from where it hit. But yeah, I still haven't actually gone to go sort of visit it up there and see it, so I haven't really seen the effects.
Well, that's good to hear. Good to see you too. So you're a partner at Founders Fund and the president of Varda. Two pretty big jobs, I'd say, but maybe that's the thing, with Elon Musk now doing a gazillion things. Maybe that's what everybody does now, like just takes on two huge jobs. I mean, how do you feel?
I don't recommend it.
Okay. Do you go to Founders Fund in the afternoon, or, I mean, probably don't have to go to Founders Fund. You can probably do your investing pretty much wherever you are.
Yeah. I try to not, sort of be super strict on like, hey, on Mondays I go at this time and this time. A part of it is just, what is most pressing and urgent on a week by week basis, between the two jobs can vary, sort of quite a bit. And so I try to keep it relatively flexible, so practically logistically, I'm working from the Varda office, sort of every day. But, look, I also, been the, most active I've been over the past 5 years was over the last quarter in terms of number of, sort of rounds I, sort of led, sort of dollars deployed. And I think a part of what helps is like, sort of both jobs just give a ton of advantages to the other. on the founders fund side of things, the ability to sort of diligence companies, especially if they're in the sphere of like industrial automation, robotics, aerospace, defense, et cetera, by operating a company, have a much deeper understanding of sort of the day-to-day challenges that we have, what vendors we would prefer, what technologies sort of are relevant to our business and the parallels in other businesses, and then two, just the number of founders that want to work with me significantly sort of increased, and the ability to convince them to take our capital over anybody else's. And so it definitely provides a lot of advantages there. And then sort of on the Varda side, being able to just have a much stronger macro understanding of other companies and how they're positioning themselves, how much they're allocating towards sort of R&D versus go to market, sales versus burn targets, et cetera. It allows you to operate your business in a way that gathers the learnings of a much broader sort of set of companies in a way that you just don't get if you're just the sort of co-founder of an individual business. And then obviously for fundraising, it's great having a sort of VC as a fundraiser, so that makes life a lot easier.
How big is the Founders Fund now, like that you guys are working off of?
So we are currently investing out of, or are just about to close our Founders Fund, sort of Growth 3, which is a $3.5 billion fund. And then we're operating out of a sort of previously raised Founders Fund 8, which is a $900 million fund, roughly. So that's the venture fund and the growth fund. So about sort of 4.4 billion in total. And there's about 9 or 10 of us or so on the investment team.
Okay. So this is culture, religion, and technology. So we'll talk about the tech later. We're going to start with culture and religion. We're going to dive into those because those are conversations that people in tech typically don't have. And what's really nice is that you were at our first culture, religion, technology event back in 2020. So you're like kind of like the OG, and now it's a show. So it's actually cool. So what this show is about. And so it's political. But I want to ask about Trump, because when we first met, it was 2021. The culture was very different there. And at that time, and now Trump's in office. What's the tech world been like now that Trump has won? And what does it mean for your company, both the fund as well as Varda?
Yeah, I don't think that there is a significant, sort of demographic shift that's really happened in the technology industry, in that, it probably mirrors what happened in the general population, where you saw like a 4 to 6 point, let's say, sort of shift. Probably roughly the same happened to technology. Perhaps it's a little bit more because, sort of the left and the Biden administration was, sort of persecuting technology. But if tech, let's say, sort of, 3 years ago or 4 years ago was, and I forget the exact numbers on this, but if you look at like political donations, voting records in, the, sort of employee bases, it's something on the order of like, 70% liberal, 30%, sort of conservative. That may have changed to like 65-35, but the fundamental dynamic is still, sort of quite similar. When I look at, I have this, sort of core group of, sort of friends that are very important to me on a very, sort of personal basis. They're my 12 closest friends. But all of us, basically, sort of work in technology. We all grew up in the ecosystem, sort of around the same time. And I use that friend group as somewhat of a barometer of like what's going on in the broader, sort of tech sphere, in that, some of them were working on AI before AI became a thing. And so that kind of helped me understand, sort of that sphere. But when I look at that, sort of groups, sort of politics and how people feel, I think it's probably representative of Silicon Valley, where it's like, yeah, of those 12, there's 4 of us that, sort of, leaned in one direction, towards Trump. The other 8 leaned in the other direction. And, I'd say are, generally moderate leftists. I don't think any of them, there's perhaps one that was, sort of more on the extreme side. But I wouldn't say that they were like too pleased with the outcome of the election. I think the only thing that's really shifted in Silicon Valley culture, over the past 4 years is just the Overton window of what is admissible in terms of sort of language, and the ability to support Trump without being ostracized. Obviously, sort of Peter in 2016, whenever the sort of RNC speech was, which I believe was 2016. Obviously had a lot of people, coming out for him, and it's a pretty prominent figure, is that now are, effectively, had campaigned for Trump, in the prior 6 months before the election. One that I like to point out is, Chamath Palihapitiya, who at the time was, sort of, pretty influential at Facebook, was, sort of pushing people to have, sort of Peter resign from the board of Facebook because of his, sort of support of Trump. Chamath, 8 years later, is, running the All In podcast and is, campaigning for Trump in the final months before the election. And, one of his besties is now the AI czar. And so, there's a pretty extreme shift from 2016 to 2024. And then even, when we, sort of met in 2021, a year earlier, I'd sort of taken the challenge upon myself to, sort of wear a MAGA hat every single day in San Francisco for a month straight. And, that was not non-trivial.
Do we have that image of Delian and that MAGA hat? That, by the way, that was really brave. What made you do that? There's that you posted that on X.
Yeah. People were not too happy about that. So yeah, this is so Jan 2020. I had actually voted for Hillary Clinton in 2016, and I think a part of it was I grew up in a sort of immigrant but liberal household. I went to high school with largely liberals. I went to college with largely liberals. I grew up in the San Francisco tech ecosystem that was very liberal, and so in some ways I actually just felt like demographically that was just like the thing that I needed to do. And somewhere in like the sort of 2018, 19, 20 timeframe, things started to a little bit fall apart for me in a variety of different sort of ways. A part of it was seeing the like extreme counter reaction that was seen in San Francisco, where people felt like, especially on the political sort of side of things, needed to go extreme left in local politics to compensate for the fact that we had a sort of Trump sort of as president. And you watch things like I was the largest donator in the San Francisco, ran the largest fundraising event for the San Francisco DA race in 2019. That was the race that ultimately Chesa Boudin, sort of won, became the DA, in San Francisco. And at the time, by the way, I tried to activate my entire tech network people and tell them, hey, this is a really critical election. If we get Chesa Boudin in office, it's going to be a total disaster for San Francisco. And like even people that now are very sort of loud, have great voices, or sort of politically mindful, care about San Francisco local politics. People like one that I sort of like to point out that like did come to the event, etc., but like was confused about why I cared so much. Was like one of my colleagues, Mike Solana, at the time was like, "What is this DA race? Why does Delian care, etc." And most of my friends just refused to sort of participate. And by the way, all of the candidates for that election were all Democrats.
They were maybe political. Your friends were they just kind of were like agnostic, and it wasn't.
Yeah, and I don't even think of myself like as a particularly political individual, right? When I think about political individuals, I think about people that like grew up in debate, in law, think about this stuff on a very deep basis. For me, I just see it as like a practical thing that I need to occasionally participate in, as a part of operating my day-to-day life. And in particular, in San Francisco local politics, I was like, okay, well, my house keeps getting robbed, my car keeps getting broken into. The like person that persecutes this is Gascon, the DA that is now, resigning. Let's get somebody, sort of better in. And so I was, sort of campaigning for that. And obviously we ultimately ended up getting Chesa Boudin, which was like, of the 4 candidates, 3 of them would have been fine. I had one favorite of those 3, but Chesa was the only one that was obviously just like an absolutely insane choice. So things started breaking down for me when I saw that was where like SF local politics was heading. And I was like, what are these people doing? Like, this is just like so irrational. Okay. There was some amount that was also like in the like, sort of personal romantic sphere where, I just had back-to-back relationships in San Francisco that fell apart, where I felt like they would make me seem just like a somebody with totally evil beliefs, when I felt like what I was sort of bringing to the table were what I thought were pretty rational, maybe a little bit more traditional gender norms, some belief in like science, physics, economic growth, like a hatred of socialism from growing up in sort of Bulgaria. But I felt like I had these sort of various romantic relationships where I was like, man, I'm like a really sort of broken person, and I need to like change to become, sort of what is the, sort of consensus beliefs and philosophies, sort of in San Francisco. Clearly, like I'm the one that's wrong. And then thankfully in March 2019.
So these relationships, they were more they were more open to being socialist, and also open to sort of the man can be a woman, like the transgender stuff. Is that it? Okay.
Yeah, like, I reflect back, like one of those relationships, I think back now, like I'm pretty sure she was just like a CCP spy. Like I am like, now pretty concerned that like, she's just completely a plant and is like currently operates in a big tech job, at a prominent AI company. And it's like terrifying that that person is who is responsible for like significant, sort of decisions there. So yeah, I mean, it was everything from even like, this is going to sound maybe, sort of too NSFW to bring up, but like as simple as like, is it okay to like, playfully spank your partner in public? Which to me was just like, that's, if I think back on like 1960s TV, yes, there's, but if it's like your partner and it's the, sort of person that you're with, et cetera, and fuck, I hate the word partner. I can't believe that even slipping back into language. If it's your girlfriend, I think you should be allowed to playfully spank your girlfriend in public. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I like partner, and also like the like the houses, you have to call them the main room or primary room. You call that master.
That was another one. So as a computer scientist and as an engineer, GitHub forced a change to all of the code repositories where if you set up a new basically code base, the typical for 40 plus years name of the main like branch that you would code on was the master branch. And so I also remember this moment in 2019 where I was like pushing a change to my personal website, and like the thing that you like, I've typed into my terminal in my computer a bajillion times is git push, sort of master. And then I got this error, and it was like, master is not a recognized branch. And I was like, what is it talking? Like, how am I? Is like, is my GitHub set up incorrectly? Is my code base? And I'm like sitting there, and I'm going on the website, I'm googling around, and I finally had this thing where I'm like, oh, they change it from master to main because it's like a sort of slavery reference. And so there's like the romantic side of things. There's like the local politics side of things. There's like this insanity on like which words you were allowed to use. And at some point, I think I just like had this moment in like December 2019 where I was like, this just all seems so crazy broken. How are people treating like this president as if he's a Nazi effectively, and like the symbolism that like, surrounding it as if it's as bad as a swastika, when it's like, this is just like, not that like dissimilar than traditional Republican values. And there's a lot of this that I honestly agree with. And at the time, I'm not saying that like, I had like fully gotten over the hump to like, sort of voting for him per se. I did end up, sort of voting for him in November 2020. But in January 2020, my original intention with it was just like, I feel like somebody's got to push the Overton window a little bit here. I don't know any better way than just like, let me put the hat on for a month. Let me tweet about it, and tweet about it not from like, I support everything about, sort of Trump, et cetera. Literally, if you like read the tweet was just basically like, this hat is a representative, sort of symbol of hope and like growth for a significant amount of the American population. It is much closer to that than a Nazi swastika. However, most people in San Francisco treat this like a Nazi swastika. We should probably consider that we're probably like the people that are on the, sort of wrong side of the table. And literally when I tweeted that, I mean, everyone went after me. I had like, Jewish friends in tech that were trying to say like this was as bad as Kristallnacht. I even had colleagues that asked me like, why are you doing this? Why are you stirring this up? We had so much heat on us from, sort of Peter in 2016, why bring this back up in 2020? We had kind of, circumnavigated that. I had, sort of friends that, sort of were super, uncomfortable with this. And I don't know, I articles written about me, and I just, I have never been one to particularly care too much about, some public pressure, some what people thought of me. And so I was like, I'm sticking to this. And so, yeah, I wore it every single day on the streets of San Francisco. I walked my dog. I went to the office. I went into board meetings. I had one board meeting where the founder requested that I, please don't wear it because he was worried that he was going to have a revolt, internally at the, sort of company. And there I was like, fine, this is my job as an investor is not to inflict pain upon my portfolio companies. But yeah, I generally wore it, 24/7, for a full month straight. And it was very entertaining. There were times where people on the streets of San Francisco, I could tell like, were very polite and deferred to me in ways that I'd never seen before. And I think a part of it was like, this guy clearly must be insane because he's wearing a MAGA hat on the streets of San Francisco. And so I should be very cautious and careful. I definitely had somebody get like physically confrontational, with me at the JP Morgan Health Conference in San Francisco at the end of January. What was very funny is it was an event that was being run by the Deputy Secretary of Health. So at the JP Morgan conference. And as a reminder, if it's January 2020 and you're at an event of the Deputy Secretary of Health, that Deputy Secretary of Health is in the Trump administration, right? That is somebody that ultimately directly reports to Trump. So I was at this event. It's kind of like, sort of cocktail hour, et cetera. I was explicitly invited by the organizer of the event, and they explicitly asked, please wear the hat, obviously, because it's literally a Trump administration event, but in San Francisco, they wanted to, sort of see some supporters. I had this, I would estimate like 47-year-old Marin dad looking guy, like, sort of super tan. You can just tell from like before you even look at him, he's just been fucking liberal his whole goddamn life and has lived in Marin his whole goddamn life and like came from trust fund and landed family, et cetera. And he just comes up to me and he goes and like, all puffed up and, looks like he's ready to get physical and just gets up into my face and he goes like, how dare you wear that hat here? Like, how dare you? And I'd be like, sir, what's your problem with the hat? He's like, do you know what that hat, like, represents, what it means, what it
Yeah.
stands for? I was like,
Yeah.
sir, I do. And I kind of went through my spiel. I was like, you may believe that this is like a Nazi swastika. That is not what I believe, like, sort of this hat,
Hey.
sort of represents. And then he literally said the words of like, he was like, if you were my son, I would disown you. And like, we need to go talk about this like outside, like, clearly trying to get me, to, get physically involved. And I just had to tell him, I was like, sir, when you're like, fucking 50 pounds lighter than me, you're a little twink and I've got like a foot on you. I don't think we should like, this is not going to go well for you. You're also like 40 years my senior. Like this is just like so many things are not in your, best sort of physical advantage here. And second, I was like, sir, as a reminder, the person who's hosting this event that I just watched you shake hands with, that person across the hall, if you can remind me, what is their title? He's like the Deputy Secretary of Health. And I was like, and which administration is he serving in? And so who is the person that is ponying the bill for this nice cocktail hour that we're having? And he just kind of like froze for a second, I think like realized that he was at a Trump administration event, looked at the host, looked at me, looked at the host, looked at me, and then walked out.
Oh my gosh. I mean, by the way, I have a hat picture too, but it wasn't so brave. Gio, do you have that hat photo? By the way, I did wear this before the election. And there I took a photo. I posted it after the election, but this is me going to Miami before the election. So this is October 2024. And I figured I'm gonna walk around San Francisco because I went to San Francisco Airport. That's my son right there. I didn't want to show his face, but that's him. He wore it too, and he wears it proudly. Actually, all my sons have been wearing them proudly. And for their reason, they felt more emasculated. It felt like as young adults, young boys, they just felt like, everybody was calling them racist for liking Trump. And, anyway, so this is October of 2024. And we thought, let's see how many people are going to give us dirty looks. And I was nervous physically nervous, right? Because, for my husband, because I thought they might beat him up. And maybe not me, but him. But he's, 6'3", so he's not too worried. But you don't want your husband to have to, save you from these radicals. Anyway, my son got so many fist bumps. It was amazing, and he got fist bumps from people who worked at the airport. They were, they were the people who they weren't the. It just surprising because the Democrats always say that they're for the working person, working man, working class. And he got fist bumps from the stewards, from the baggage handlers. It was, the security guards. It was really refreshing. It was really nice. You could tell things were shifting. So anyway, so that's my hat moment. Not as brave as you, but it was before the election. And then that's when, and Gio, we could take that down. We don't have to keep showing my hat. But then I see Peter, and we're on stage, and he tells me that a bunch of his tech friends have shifted right, but they're not going to say so publicly. Many of them have, obviously, but a lot of them are quiet. What are you saying? What about of your friends, you said, a bunch of them voted for Trump in 2024. Were they like you? They voted for Hillary in 2016. And did they have their own like through line moments? I call them through line moments.
Credit to at least, that close group of friends. The other three guys that voted for Trump, they had voted for Trump, sort of consistently through 2016, 2020, and 2024. So, they were more, sort of clear eyed. I'd say one out of those four has been willing to be a little bit more sort of public about, sort of his viewpoints, but the rest mostly keep it, sort of still close to the chest. And so you're obviously seeing folks like, or you have seen folks like, sort of Sachs, et cetera, sort of come out very publicly. But yeah, I don't know, at least like relative to maybe, sort of Peter's, sort of friend group. And I think a part of it is, I see him as somebody that is more deeply involved in politics than I am. And so that probably filters his friend group in a more certain direction versus, I would probably guess my friend group is on average maybe more liberal than Peter's. I'm not 100% sure, but I at least have not seen as much of a shift, honestly. All I've really seen is, more of a, sort of willingness to voice, sort of one's beliefs. I've seen more frustrations from my liberal, sort of friends where they like agree that like, finally, they finally see, unlike in 2019 when I was trying to get people to look at the like SFDA race. Now they're all very activated on like, local SF politics, talking about it, thinking about it, seeing how it affects their day-to-day, sort of lives. But I haven't seen honestly as much of like an ideological shift. And, and I think a part of it is, you got to be, sort of careful because, so the pendulum almost certainly is going to swing back, even though, Trump is in power now and the opportunity window has shifted. It's not to say that, at some point, this swings back again. And so, I'm always, sort of fearful that the, sort of, fascist libs will, want to arrest me for things that I say today. And so, gotta future proof anything I say.
That's interesting that you say that you don't see a lot of shift in your friends, and they're largely liberal, and that's interesting. But you could still be friends with them, and they're not. And so, do you have tough conversations, or you guys just don't talk about it?
I think a part of it is like this entire group of friends, at least that I spend most of my time with, is like, relatively, sort of moderate. And so, yes, we may have some, disagreements on particular, sort of policy issues, et cetera. But I've never had something where it's ever like threatened the sort of friendship or, somehow haven't been able to discuss it. Yeah, I think, I find myself as somebody that wants to, talk about sort of tough topics with the people that I'm close to. And so if somebody's not capable of doing that, then I'm probably not going to be, sort of friends with them for, a particularly long period of time. But yeah, I don't think that like the avoidant, sort of mechanism is the, sort of right way to maintain a relationship either. It's probably just like not the right relationship to sustain if they can't handle talking to you about, sort of basic topics on, what should be appropriate, I don't know, immigration policy for the United States or, are tariffs good versus not.
I mean, you can talk about that, and you can have a pretty, you can have a decent sort of conversation about that stuff, right? It's more the cultural stuff that really that's where it gets kind of, maybe you can avoid that. You can avoid those questions, and just stick to the economy or something like that. And as long as they don't start calling you names, then I guess you're okay. So, So do you think that, so it doesn't sound like you've had these conversations where you shifted or they shifted, right? That basically you had that shift, but most of your liberal friends haven't. And those who are more vocal about it have largely been sort of right of center. And now they're just more vocal about it. They're not hiding or afraid.
Totally. Sachs has been right of center for a very long time. It's not like Sachs was once upon a time, sort of a liberal, right? And so this is where, I think, it's important to see the signal. Yeah, and again, that's where it's like it's important to see the signal through the noise. I'm not saying that it is, sort of zero people that have shifted, but I think it's roughly representative of like the, sort of national demographic where you're seeing like a 6-point shift. And so, yes, is there going to be, on the order of 1 out of every 20 people in a friend group that have shifted from liberal to Republican? Yes. And I happen to be 1 out of 20 in that, sort of friend group. Chamath happens to be the, sort of 1 out of 4 in the, sort of, all in, sort of bestie, group. But, those are actually rarer than you think. Most of what you're seeing in terms of cultural shift has to do with, Overton window opening, much more so than ideological, sort of base shifts. And some amount of that is also, I'm not even sure that there's even that much ideological shifts. I think there's a part of it where it's, people are comparing the specific, sort of candidate. So I'm sure with even, somebody like Chamath as an example, if you were to present, a NPC candidate that is roughly representative of both parties' values, that is, the average of the center left position and the average of the center right position, I wouldn't be surprised if somebody like, sort of Chamath votes for the like NPC average center left position. The problem with elections is you don't have this like hypothetical average NPC figure running for office. You have a particular human and individual that has very specific, IQ, opinions, sort of beliefs, etc. And so I don't know. Let's take the example of,
How about Gavin
um,
Newsom?
yeah, exactly. I was only going to say Gavin Newsom versus JD Vance. I'm not sure that, a Chamath type, and again, I'm not like trying to overly, sort of be specific to him per se, but let's say the archetype that, sort of a Chamath represents, that is a very late converter, right? Like it took Chamath until, whatever, 2024, like during this year's election cycle, like he was still critiquing, sort of Trump, et cetera, in 2021, 22, et cetera. So he was like, it took a lot to get him there, right? It took cognitive decline. It took like, crazy money printing, et cetera, right? I'd like to think that I'm not necessarily that archetype, and that like, much earlier on in, the process, sort of shifted over. So if you take that archetype of a very late shifter and you put them, against, sort of Gavin Newsom versus JD Vance, I think that's like a much tougher, sort of call. That's where it's a, good reminder of like these people maybe like, sort of quote unquote, allies today. Now, I don't think Newsom's going to be as, sort of radical as, sort of Kamala was. He's going to, sort of insist that all Republicans are Nazis. No, he's clearly willing to like have Steve Bannon and Charlie Kirk on his podcast. I think that's also what makes him an incredibly, sort of potent, sort of politician, in that he clearly is willing to, sort of bridge the aisle. He's also much lower IQ than JD Vance. And, in the past 50, 75 years, it's, statistically much more likely that the lower IQ candidate wins. And so, that leaders want to believe that, in a Newsom versus Vance race, Newsom wins.
I don't know that statistic. Is that true? The lower IQ wins.
I'd have to, sort of go double check this. But, I heard it from a very credible, statistician, sort of source friend of mine. So I'm inclined to believe it, but I admit I've not done my own first party research.
That's interesting. Okay, let's shift to religion here. It's fun. We talk politics, then religion, stuff you talk about all the time. Let's see. Now, and this is why, obviously Peter and I can talk a lot about religion because he loves to talk about this stuff. I've never spoken to you about religion. I do believe this is a war, and I think we might have said it on stage too, Peter and I, and I do think he thinks it's a religious war, because whatever this is can't be fought without religion. I think you heard him say that. He definitely said that on stage in 2024. So it's basically, and this is maybe like the biggest example of this would be the trans stuff, right? Where you really, that's a religion in itself, the trans ideology. And it doesn't seem to be going away. And so it does feel like we're a religious war between those who believe there is a God and those who believe that they are gods. What are your thoughts on that?
Let's see. I've sort of somewhat. It's actually sort of the first time that I think I've ever been asked to speak on my thoughts on religion publicly, and I have a somewhat complex history with it, in that from growing up in a family that lived during the sort of fall of the Soviet, during the rule of and the fall of the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union had sort of complex sort of thoughts on religion, in that they sort of largely saw it as a threat to the communist religion, and so largely banned any type of religious activity for the entire time that they ruled Bulgaria, from sort of World War II until 1988, 89. And so when you look at in Bulgaria and my grandparents' generation, sort of deep sort of religious backgrounds, sort of grew up going to church on a very sort of regular basis. When you go to then my parents' generation, it was effectively outlawed, and so they could only sort of practice truly in private. And obviously what that ends up meaning is that a lot of the cultural patterns of religion never really end up sort of forming nearly as strongly. And so as a child, at least, I grew up in a very sort of secular household where I think we probably went to church a total of 4 times in my entire life. It was with a great grandparent sort of passing away, one particular Easter, I was, it wasn't, to zero. I was baptized, as a child, so were my siblings. But again, it wasn't, sort of frequent occurrence, nor is it something that was, sort of particularly discussed in our household. Um, and then, I kind of mentioned that, I grew up in, what was a relatively liberal household, transitioning to a relatively liberal college, which is every large college in the United States, to an extremely sort of liberal city. And I think people just replace the institution of religion with poor representations sort of it in some of these sort of ecosystems, right? And that can be everything from the sort of weekly Pilates class, to the meditation group, to, yes, some of it can be the sort of radical sort of ideologies and sort of activism, but I wouldn't say it's like the majority of secular liberals that live in San Francisco are sort of using sort of trans ideologies as their religion. They do have something, though, that sort of represents sort of that for them. um and I think two things start to sort of shift some of my sort of personal thinking on this over the past call it sort of 4 years. A part of it is honestly, it's hard not to think about theology when you have two great theologians as sort of colleagues that sort of listen sort of talk about it all the time, right? It already sort of Peter and sort of Trey are probably the most interesting theologians in tech. And they both happen to work in the same place where I work at. And so there's some amount where you can't help but, go to their talks and, sort of listen to what they, should have to say.
Yeah.
And then the sort of second thing that, really started to shift it for me was honestly just the joy, the glory, the intensity of the birth of my first child, where, you know, I, at my heart of hearts, love physics. I love understanding, sort of the universe. Um, but there's also something about sort of watching life come from sort of nothing that makes you question. Okay, yes, the laws of physics may rule all of this, but perhaps there's sort of somebody pulling sort of the purse strings sort of behind that, and it may show up as the laws of physics, but there's a bunch of things that are a little odd about sort of the universe. The
Hmm.
fact that we happen to have a large celestial body very near us called the moon that makes it so that sort of asteroids sort of hit the Earth on a far sort of less regular basis. The fact that the specific sort of coefficient of gravity that rules the universe around us is sort of not so strong that it compresses the entire galaxy into a single sort of black hole. It's not so weak that everything flies apart and stars and planets can't form, but it's at that sort of perfect sort of state such that you can have stars and planets, and stable ecosystems sort of form. And so I think that's started to make me whatever word you'd like to use, sort of spiritual, religious, sort of a believer in sort of higher power. And then my son's now sort of 15 months old, and as you start to sort of open your mind to paying attention to these signals, these patterns, these sort of potentially sort of divine interventions that lead to sort of the joy of childbirth, but also can sort of lead to hardship. You just start to realize that maybe a lot more of sort of your life is due to the glory of God and divine intervention, much more so than any particular sort of actions sort of you take. In the more recent I've had a recent foray into the world of what is called sort of focused prayer, or sort of Christian sort of mysticism, and a part of that has been influenced by some of my wife's research into this sort of branch of meditation, Buddhist meditation, known as jhanas. It's a sort of unrelated branch, or a very distinct branch from what we know in the West as Buddhist meditation, which is the sort of mindfulness sort of meditation. This is what was brought to the United States in the sort of 1970s. This is what is thought of as mindfulness. Sort of clear your thoughts. This is what the apps like Calm sort of are based off of. which is a largely vacative, sort of, an emptiness, as the, sort of fundamental goal. Jhana has a very, sort of, different, goal to it. It is much more intentional and focused in the, sort of mental states that you're, sort of seeking to achieve. And the first one of those, sort of states is called, sort of J1. It's, sort of Jhana 1. And I'll describe the technique that is used to get to that state, and I'll also relate, why, I see a sort of religious connection, sort of to it. J1 you can kind of think of as the opposite of a, sort of panic attack. If you think about, the night before, sort of a big presentation you have, if you've ever, not been able to sleep, sort of that night before, because you're nonstop thinking about, okay, this and this thing needs to go right, and this. In some ways, those are sort of mini, sort of panic attacks, and I'm sure you've heard of people that have extreme versions of that, where they like cycle in on that like sort of anxious, sort of feeling nonstop to the point that they become, totally incoherent. What J1 is, sort of attempts to do is show you that you can, sort of train your mind to effectively induce the opposite of, sort of that mental state, where instead of, sort of focusing in and repeating a, sort of negative, anxious thought over and over again, do that, sort of same looping process, but instead with a euphoric, positive, sort of thought. And loop on it and repeat it over and over again in the same way. So if you think of mindfulness as the emptiness, sort of state, this is actually a focused, sort of positive and, sort of euphoric state. And I'll walk you through at least, sort of the technique that, sort of has, worked for me. And it's, so it sounds sort of a little bit, sort of silly, but what, sort of worked for me when, I was reading through sort of the guide that my wife put together was like, okay, think about, sort of when in your life have you felt, sort of the most euphoria? And as someone that is, sort of quite the, sort of extreme sports and adrenaline junkie, I admit that like when I feel the most euphoria, especially over the past, sort of call it 2 years, is like when I'm out in the ocean, kite surfing on a really, strong and windy day, and I just land a sick trick. I like fly up 20, 30 feet in the air. I rip a 360, I land it. And also, my brother is 20 feet away from me, sort of sitting there and, sort of kiting next to me.
Yeah.
And so, you sit there, and, start with the equivalent of like the mindfulness meditation of like, I have some, sort of peaceful sounds in the background. I empty my, head, but I don't just sit there empty. I then start to put myself into that moment. I think about, okay, driving to my kite surfing spot, setting up my kiting lines, getting the kite pumped up, putting it into the air, really thinking about, okay, the like sun is in my face, the salt water is like, sort of spraying in front of me. And then, okay, yes, I have the kite, sort of flying, I catch like the air, and you really put yourself into that moment of just like that euphoria of being 40 feet up in the air and, feeling just such joy for being, sort of in, sort of that moment and, getting to, sort of, experience a honestly, truly glorious experience. And you think about that again and again, you force yourself to think about it again. And for me, when I get into those, sort of focused states, I then tap into something that, I can't describe other than, what feels like the presence of God, where I have this, like, I can be in a dark room and it's this like, sort of shining white light. It completely takes over my brain in a way where like, I can no longer actually have conscious thought. Like I've, not been able to continue my stream of thinking where it's like, I'm thinking about kite surfing, I'm thinking about kite surfing. And then all of a sudden, it feels like you have this, sort of connection with God, and it completely takes over your brain. And sometimes it's 2 minutes, sometimes it's 10 minutes. And, and when I've sort of started to be able to practice this enough, I no longer need to do that pre-work of the sort of kite surfing thing. I instead can tap into the thing where I'm sort of thinking about a difficult situation or some personal thing or a spiritual question that I have, and I can like tap into this like sort of focused state that allows me to feel like what has a sort of otherworldly presence come and sort of almost like not necessarily fully converse with me, but provide me some good guidance and provide me some joy in a way that also makes it like sort of baseline, I don't know, happiness and ability to deal with any sort of trials and tribulations is so much easier to deal with when it's like this is a part of the plan, and whether today's day goes poorly or not poorly or great or not great. If I slept poorly the night before, I previously would have a lot of sort of negative thoughts, externalities, sort of things that I would get very anxious about. And, it's not to say that with these two jobs, I don't have, sort of stressful days, but those stressful days with this type of sort of focused prayer are so much sort of easier to sort of endure. And that it's not to say that like if I slept really poorly the night before, of course I still feel the physical effects, and yes, I can tell that my body is tired, but it doesn't
Sure.
mean that I need to be like mentally in a bad state in order to sort of get through sort of my day. And so
Is this
I found it to be.
is this always how you get into a prayerful state? Is that like the process of getting into like, or is that, can you just sit there and just pray? Or do you actually go through this whole motion of like, okay, start with thinking about being 30 feet in the air, my euphoric state. And then is that the process for you?
I now having done it enough times, I don't need to as deeply go through the whole like kite surfing, replication, etc. So if I've had a really bad night of sleep or if I'm in a really dark spot, yes, I do like use those tools. But now,
Yeah.
honestly, even when I was like describing it to you, like whatever 6, 7 minutes ago, I actually started to get a little bit in the euphoric state, and I'd be like, I can't deal with that right now. I'm not actually trying to pray. I know I'm talking about it, but now even just like even talking about it, starts to sort of get me into that state. And obviously, I try to do that, typically, obviously in private when I have something that I need to, sort of, pray about.
Yeah.
But and I've tried to find, there is again this like sort of some branches of what are known as like sort of Christian mysticism that talk about these like sort of focused prayer techniques that sort of have overlap with this sort of sort of jhanas technique from Buddhism. But I admit I
Yeah.
haven't sort of quite found anything that sort of fully sort of overlaps with what what I consider my version of, let's say, sort of prayer and sort of religion to be. And I think in some ways, my wife feels the same way, where it's like I technically come from this like Bulgarian Eastern Orthodox sort of religion. She comes from Catholicism. I kind of feel like a sort of a devotee without a home. And maybe I need to do as Trey has done, and one day start my own church around my own sort of sort of philosophies.
Or just go to
But
his church. Have you been
that's
to his
true.
church?
That's true. I've seen some of it. It's I understand that it I haven't yet visited, so I'd have to I probably have stronger opinions after sort of go visit it sometime. But anyways, yeah, first time I've ever really talked about at least my thoughts on religion. It's not as sort of theologically, historically let's say sort of relevant relative to sort of some of Peter's sort of thinkings and philosophies, but mine definitely has some sort of pretty practical effects for me sort of day to day that I find very
It's evolved and it
very
sounds like it's
necessary for a wholesome life.
it's evolved and it's grown. It's partly because of your marriage, partly because of your son, partly because of the culture, maybe with, you're surrounded by two outwardly very vocal Christians, right? It doesn't sound like you have a community of Christian friends. Do you always talk about your group of friends, 8 to 10 of them that you're close with? Where are they?
Some are Jewish and relatively, I'd say relatively devout, not sort of insanely so. The rest strike me as likely secular, or if they have any sort of religious sort of components to it, I don't see them sort of talk about it or implement it on a on any type of day-to-day basis. And I think a part of it is a significant portion of that group is still childless, and there is something about uh, I don't know. I think sort of it's hard to appreciate God's glory without witnessing the like miracle of childbirth, I guess. And so
Do
even if they
you
have it somewhere in them,
do you believe in God then? Would you say you believe in God, right?
yeah. And I look, I think that word can mean sort of very different things to sort of very different people. So, do I believe in the definition of God that I have, like, sort of yes. If you were to, sort of stick me, head up against another Christian or another, sort of Jewish person or X, Y, Z, would we all like agree upon that, sort of definition? No, almost, sort of certainly, sort of not. But do I believe in my, sort of God, sort of absolutely, and do I believe that that has a lot of overlap with other people's gods? Almost, so certainly. But I think there's almost certainly some personal variation on how people think about this stuff.
Yeah, there's definitely variation in terms of the nature of man as well. So I'd be curious to know where you stand on this. And Peter, I mean, his book, his essay, Straussian movement or Straussian moment. He basically writes about this. It was through that essay that I was introduced to, I believe it's Carl Schmitt, and Carl Schmitt, who basically says that, look, we're basically divided on what is our definition of the nature of man. That's what's been, and it's really hard to get in sync with that, because that's actually what caused all these religious wars, right? And Carl Schmitt says, well, eventually that's going to come up, and you're going to have to take a side. So, so it's either, is the nature of man either, there is a God and we're inherently evil or broken, or we are gods and we're inherently good and we'll make it better. It's up to us to make it better. And those are the two sides. So it's what do you think the nature of man is? Is it inherently good, or is it inherently broken?
This isn't something that I've sort of thought about before you asking this question, but sort of my intuition based off of my prayers would be much more so the latter, that we are the sort of manifestation in God's creation, and fit much more into sort of that latter camp. And I think that also sort of relates to the sort of personal experiences I have sort of with sort of focused meditation, where sort of God feels like he's within me, and occasionally sort of reveals sort of himself, and in times of need and in times of prayer. But it's he is both an internal and external sort of figure, and so by default that fits more into the latter, versus the former feels like it's a sort of strictly external sort of figure.
Got it. I forgot which one I said, formerly and latter. What was the
Former was that, like, God is external and we are evil, and the latter was God is within us all, basically.
Oh, yeah. Well, not that we're evil. I think it's more do we have the capacity to be evil, right?
Yeah.
That would be more of the Christian ethos, right? And that's why Jesus came down and died on the cross for us, so we could be forgiven. So man could be forgiven. So if we needed to be forgiven, then we need to be forgiven for something, and that would be sin. Okay, I know that we don't have much time, because I think you gave me an hour, so I'm going to go through some other stuff, like Varda. I think we have a video of Varda really quickly. And how much time do you have? Do I have what 5 more minutes, 10 more minutes?
Yeah, I can go a little over if needed. Yeah.
Gio, do we have that video of Varda? I just took this from your ex.
Oh yeah, of
your
course.
feed, which was really cool, and I think it was some sort of like marketing video.
Yeah, I'm happy to narrate
in
over.
a room just around the corner from where I'm sitting in Varda's El Segundo headquarters, Varda's mission operators spent 3 days last week working with our partners
like
to
middle school, effectively, and
the W2
I've been
capsule.
sort of thinking about it for a long time. Approached it originally as an investment thesis, but couldn't quite find anybody to work on it with us. So yeah, this is a video from our it's towards the end of the video, I guess. This is a video of our second reentry capsule mission that just landed in Australia about 2 weeks ago now, where we basically launched to space in the third week of January, orbited around the Earth for about 6 weeks, doing some pharmaceutical production work, and then re-entered from Mach 25 down to 0, and sort of landed out in Australia, and then had helicopters go out and pick up the capsule. The sort of thesis behind the company is that when you're up in orbit, you do not experience the effects of gravity. You've almost certainly seen videos of the Apollo astronauts floating around, ISS, et cetera, and that allows you to have basically different chemical outcomes to work and processing that you're doing up there than what you get down here on Earth, and so that can lead to improved pharmaceutical product quality, in a way that improves clinical outcomes and sort of patient experiences. And we're not the first to come up with this idea. There are sort of 50 plus years of sort of research that sort of show the potential for this. But the idea behind Varda was, if we can do this on an independently run satellite and reentry vehicle, rather than just on the International Space Station, that would be the path to commercialization and getting it in the clinic. And so we did our first demonstration mission last year that landed in February 24. We just landed this second mission in February 25. Our third one actually goes up to space in about 10 hours from now. So we're starting to prove that this is something that is a regularly accessible capability. And we're.
So are you collecting compounds from space, or taking them from here, bringing them up there, and mixing them up there? Because it's a different process without gravity. Is that what you're doing? Are you taking the compounds from space? Like
from down here.
Okay.
So we're just basically taking precursor products down here. Basically, they can think of it as like mixing them together up there. And then when you mix them together up there, you get a very different result. And then you basically harden that result and you can bring it down. And now you get the benefits of that result down here on the ground. But it was not a result that you could have achieved basically down here on the ground.
Down here,
Sort of the one-liner.
And then, so how many, and then, so then you have different compounds down here. And have you been testing on them to see if they're working, like in, with potential drugs?
Yeah, definitely. We are still in the sort of process, let's say, sort of proving out our sort of independent platform. So it's not to say that the drugs that we're working on today are immediately ready to go into clinic, but we are now with the success of our first and second flight, starting to work on programs that are no longer just sort of proof points of the process and showing that we can change chemical outcomes in microgravity, which we've now shown across our first and second flight, but now marching towards chemical outcome changes that would also be relevant to sort of clinic. And so you can think of our first two flights, and honestly, it'll be our first call at like 4 to 5 flights that are sort of more MVP proof points, with flights sort of 7 onwards being more focused on basically producing product that then sort of goes into a clinic and goes into a human.
How much does it cost for a flight?
Right now, we do them, on the order of like single digit, sort of millions, high single digit, sort of millions per flight. But we are steadily, basically ramping down that cost. Now, again, if you can get something where you're significantly improving the sort of outcome of a drug's performance, such that you're expanding its market share or the patient access, et cetera, that can end up sort of representing billions in revenue, on the other side. And so, while sort of pricey, I think not too unreasonable in the grand scheme of clinical trial costs.
Okay. And do you feel that you can be more innovative now under this administration versus the prior? I mean, do you see a significant change in the regulatory environment, or any benefit to you, real benefit?
Yeah, I'd say like regulatory environment has been the one that sort of clearly has shifted the most. We originally had our first vehicle be left up in orbit. It was supposed to only go up in orbit for about 2 months. So we were launching in June of 2023. We intended to land in August of 2023. We then ended up getting delayed by basically sort of regulators and sort of military bureaucrats, such that we weren't actually able to land until February of 2024. So it was originally supposed to be a 2-month mission to space, turned into an 8-month mission to space. And so that was sort of very painful. In this new administration, we've sort of clearly seen them sort of remove some of the red tape and our ability to operate our business. And so we've been sort of very grateful for that, and how much easier it's been to just be able to fly our spacecraft and land our spacecraft.
Got it. Just one last question on that. When you take a compound that goes into sort of a drug, let's say it's a diabetes drug or something, and then you bring it up to space, does it come back down for the same purpose, or and it just enhances that drug, or is it a different drug?
Yeah, I'll give you sort of the best blockbuster case study, which was in 2019. Merck actually flew this cancer drug up to the International Space Station. This cancer drug typically required a 4 to 6 hour intravenous drip in order to be delivered into patients. What they showed up on the International Space Station was they made a better version of that same drug. So we're not changing the sort of drug and what it does and which condition it's for, but we can make a better version of it that allows them now to instead give patients that drug as a syringe that they can pick up from a local Walgreens. And so that means patient adherence is easier. That means the sort of breadth of patients that can access it that might not have had access to an IV clinic is significantly larger. And so, yeah, you're not really changing the sort of molecular individual molecular structure of the drug. What you're changing is the larger macro structure of the sort of crystal that the drug is held in, and that just changes largely how quickly it breaks down in your bloodstream, whether it crosses the blood-brain barrier and the permeability through that, the sort of room temperature stability of the drug. So it could be something where there's a diabetes drug that's gotten through phase 2 clinical trials, but the issue is there's no way of dosing it in patients because it requires patients to, eat 30 tablets per day. And it's just like, nobody's going to orally take 30 tablets per day, just like an insane amount that would literally fill your stomach. But perhaps we can, sort of improve that same drug and get it down to 2 tablets per day and allow it to actually make it through clinical trials. And so it's both improving drugs that are on the market today, but also drugs that are in development that have some promising clinical outcomes, but just don't have a way to be delivered to the patient. We can help improve that as well.
Okay, tell me about Hill and Valley Forum really quickly. And you have an event coming up, but what that sounds really interesting.
Yeah. So started as a bit of a side project between me and 2 friends, Jacob Hellberg and Christian Garrett, in the fall of 2021. The thinking at the time was there were a lot more startups that were starting to sort of deal with the U.S. government due to both regulations, working in defense tech, aerospace, et cetera. And people were all individually putting effort in terms of sort of briefing folks on the Hill, their sort of DoD officials, their regulators, but there wasn't an obvious sort of gathering point for the top sort of VCs, top tech founders, and elected officials to convene in a single forum. And so, I think it was, let's pull together a dinner. There was originally supposed to be like 20, 30, 40 people. That first one rapidly exploded to like 90 to 100 people because there was so much interest. Given all the interest, we decided to run it back 6 months later. That event ended up having 300 people. And so now we've turned it into sort of multi-year long institution where this is going to be our 4th year running the Hill and Valley Forum. It's a full day of sort of content and panels, both reception and dinner, and it's one of the largest sort of gatherings of elected officials and tech leaders. This year we have folks like Jensen Huang from NVIDIA speaking alongside Alex Karp, Brian Schimm from Anduril, as well as we have not yet announced, but there will be some pretty significant political officials that will be at the conference speaking and participating as well. Last year we even had several senators and congressmen come up to us and say that other than the State of the Union, this was one of the events that had the most elected officials in a single place. And it was actually valuable even for them amongst themselves, because most of the time it's them just communicating through one another's staff versus actually being able to get together and see each other, sort of coming to support particular topics. It's a very bipartisan event. Last year we both had Speaker Johnson as well as Chuck Schumer sort of speaking. We plan to keep it very bipartisan this year as well. It's really meant to be sort of this Switzerland-like sort of forum for sort of the Hill and the Valley to get together, given how critical it is for these two groups to stay in sync if we want to continue to sort of progress as a society, but also maintain our national security advantage against China.
Okay, now I get it. Hill and Valley. Okay, makes sense.
Yeah.
We're going to end this with some like really quick questions because I'm going to let you go, but really quick answers, and I'm just going to make up some questions here. So
go for it.
Should TikTok be banned?
Absolutely.
Okay. How many kids are you going to end up with?
If you ask my wife, 3. If you ask me, 4. So 3.5.
How much will Doge actually end up cutting when they're done?
My guess is on the order of like 150 billion, something like that, of like actual cuts. There's been these like, what they say is their headline, and then the audited cuts, et cetera. So in terms of like audited cuts, 150.
Okay. Is the stock market going to continue going down?
Depends on what time period you focus on. If it's 3 years, almost certainly no. If it's 3 months, almost certainly yes.
Is the stock market going to end up higher by the end of the year?
No. Higher than the peak? No.
Okay. All right. Higher than the peak? No. Oh, wow. That's not a very good thing for the rest.
Peak was pretty high.
Okay, the peak was pretty high. Okay. All right. Well, that's it. That's all the rapid questions I have for you. So, Delian, this was great. Really enjoyed the conversation. Hope to have you on again. And we're going to probably do the Culture, Religion, Technology event again in Miami. So hopefully you can join us then.
Absolutely. Well, yeah, thanks so much for having me, and look forward to seeing you in Miami.
I've been speaking with Delian Asparouhov. He's a partner at Founders Fund and president of and co-founder of BARDA. I'm Baby Francisco Royce, and you've been listening to CRT.